Welcome to Of, By, and For the People. I've got John Ballinger and Eric Buchanan. We're going to continue our series about the American experiment from the theoretical to the practical via conversations from the conference tables to dinner tables. We're going to do this over the course of videos and podcasts by sharing our own experiences, asking questions, challenging our beliefs. Plus, soon we are going to have other voices and perspectives join us. Now, with that being said, I'm going to introduce each of you. Tell everybody what you do for a living, Sir Eric Buchanan. And I say, sir, you're not royalty. You're not like.
I'm not, although technically you could add Esquire at the end of my name because
I'll say, wait a minute, stop. Hey, Eric Buchanan, Esquire. Could you please tell everybody what you do?
Thanks, Clint.
Yeah.
So I am a disability insurance attorney, and I help the plaintiff, the disabled person, the person who has an insurance policy, if the insurance policy doesn't pay. That's my little niche. Mostly disability insurance, helping business owners, doctors, lawyers who bought those policies, dentists, other professionals. And if an insurance company says we're not going to pay when you have a claim, that's our niche. We also do some life insurance, some health insurance, other employee benefits. I've been in this practice area since about 1997, started my own firm in 2003. Before that, I went to law school at Washington and Lee. And before that, I served 5 years in the U.S. Navy as a naval aviator flying P-3 Orions. I kind of consider myself to be not just a good disability insurance attorney, but also an ERISA attorney, but also a constitutional law scholar. That's my hobby. I like reading that stuff. And I was a history major before I went into the Navy.
And Eric's really good at writing stern letters. I've had him do it for me a few times. Speaking of being able to write stern letters, I bet John Ballinger's written a few of those in the past, haven't you, John?
One or 12 in the past.
In the past day.
So John Ballinger, Army veteran, father, patriot. The majority of my time is spent with insurance adjusters and attorneys on complex claims and legal issues that deal with business owners. And so I've been doing that now 15 years, and I used my ability to work on aircraft and all the moving parts to learn how to deal with our court systems, the insurance industry, and the alphabet soup of the government to do what I do.
Well, and today, we're now knee deep. We're deep enough into this now to where we're going to do a recap. I'm going to let Eric talk a little bit about what we covered last week. Today, the topic is going to be associations and lobbying, and we're going to go down that road. But I also think we would be remiss if I didn't remind people why we're doing this video series, because new people will be seeing this every time. This whole series came about because I'd had separate conversations with Eric Buchanan and John Ballinger about the disconnect we are seeing from the media coverage on TV, the social media response from people who used to call each other friends, and the disconnect between we the people, and the government that we put in place. And I think it's needed, and I think these conversations are valid. I'm looking forward to having guests on. As soon as we get our chemistry down a little bit, we'll start inviting other people into the chaos. But did I nail that for both of y'all? That disconnect isn't that what we're trying to do this for, to bridge that gap?
Yeah, I think you did a great job, Clint. What we talked about last time, and I think was relevant to getting this started, was talking about the U.S. Constitution, the basic structure of the Constitution. But I think what John and I both are very interested in is how does that apply today? If you're a business owner, if you're just a citizen, how does it work? How does the Constitution work for you? How should our system be working for you? And we are a republic in the United States, if we can keep it, as Ben Franklin famously said right after the Constitution was written. And an important part of keeping our republic is that we need to know how it works. It's supposed to be a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And if the government is not responsive to the people, in part because people don't know how to communicate with the government and deal with the government, then we lose that ability to self-govern. So fighting hard to self-govern, whether you're on the left or the right of the political spectrum, understanding how the system works and how the government should respond to you, your business, your constituency, your friends, your neighbors, your interests, I think is a crucial thing that Americans need to learn. And I think that John and I got a good start on that last week, talking about the Constitution, which I can recap some more after John has a chance to talk.
John?
Yeah, so Eric and I came at this at two different angles, talking to Clint, with Eric being the historian and me being, all right, what happened to set this thing off the rails.
Right.
And so I went down this road years ago of finding out, how did we take what the founding fathers intended and how did it get hijacked? And that's the word I used when I was talking to Eric the first time. It's like, I think our country's been hijacked. And the deeper I got into it, the more I understood how it was hijacked, and then how complicit we were as a society in allowing it to be hijacked. And a lot of people don't like hearing me say that. And I say, well, you know what? It's our fault.
100%.
And so, so what led me down the path to where I started my career is I think it was hijacked administratively. And when I tell people that, they're like, what does that mean? And I said, well, you've got to go back to where this thing really started going off the rails and the consumers really lost control of it. And I take that back in the 40s. That's when I really started looking at it and say, in the 40s is when this thing started getting hijacked. However, I would tell you that it was even before that the process started, and it really started through what I would call associations and lobbying. And not understanding at the time what an association was when I started investigating it and how much influence they had. And my first visits, and this was in 2006, where I visited the two largest associations in America, which are AARP and AAA.
All right, we're gonna pin it right there. I'm writing it down. Look at this: AARP and AAA. So what we're gonna do, Eric, sir, the floor is yours. Before I turn this over to, and I want our people to tune in know that John Ballinger has been waiting for this conversation for a couple of weeks. So before we get lost in the weeds, because I think it's going to be a great conversation, Eric, tell everybody real quick what we talked about last week and why that kind of leads into where we're at. And just so everybody understands, we're going to be going back and forth in these conversations over the next few months. So what did we talk about last week, Eric?
Yeah, so we talked about the basic structure of the U.S. government as set out in the United States Constitution. It's important for people to understand, to have context for how our country works, to understand the basic rules. And the most basic rules starting in the Constitution are that we have a separation of powers. And the idea behind a separation of powers is if you don't give one person or one small assembly all the control, they're less likely, the people in power are less likely to be abusive with that power. It's how you avoid tyranny. It's how you avoid having a totalitarian system. And so our founding fathers, I think, pretty brilliantly set up a system that was very diverse in terms of the power. So Article 1 of the Constitution sets up the two-part legislature. You have a House of Representatives and the Senate. They both have to pass something by a majority. They even have some procedural rules like the filibuster that requires sometimes more than a majority to get something done. But for a law to pass under the Constitution, for a rule to be made that we all have to follow, the legislator has to pass that law under Article 1, and that is both the House and the Senate. The second part of the Constitution is the executive branch. Article 2 sets up one person to be the President of the United States. The President has certain powers that he can exercise. So back to Article 1 for a quick second. Let's also be clear about this. The federal government in their legislature, in the Senate and the House, has limited powers. They don't have all the powers of government in the Congress of the United States. That's limited to a certain list of powers. So Article 2 then gives powers to the president. He also does not have all the power of the United States. Article 3 is the courts, and the courts are supposed to be, in part, a check on the power of the Article 1 legislator and the Article 2 president. If they do something that is unconstitutional, the court can say something's unconstitutional, that law doesn't pass muster, or that presidential act doesn't pass muster, and refrain the power. And what people forget is the Article 4 of the Constitution is the next balance on power, and it's the article that addresses the power of the states. And in the United States, one of the things that's important to remember is the traditional powers of the government to do just about everything, to have a police force, to enforce health regulations, to decide what the definition of marriage is, to establish what the rules are for torts, which is when you have a car wreck or you have a personal injury case and what you can sue for, all those things. That's all stuff that is supposed to be decided by the states. And in theory, under our Constitution, the federal government should not have authority to issue those rules. And the last part I'll set up before John starts talking about associations, is historically for a law to become a rule that we all have to follow in the United States is that the House and the Senate start the law, the other house has to pass, the other side has to pass it, and then the president signs it into law. If the president doesn't sign it into law, then it takes 2/3 majority of both houses to vote again to pass it over the president's veto. So in order to make a law, you have to get both houses to agree plus the president. And there's even more tricky rules. For example, if it's a law spending money, the law has to start in the House of Representatives. And if it's a tax, it has to start in the House of Representatives. The problem is, and here's your softball, John, is that actually I would say going back to the 1890s is when it really first started. And then in the 1930s, when FDR was president, and in response to the Great Depression, the expanding power of government was to create federal agencies that had the authority to issue rules. So Congress would create an agency, and then Congress would say in the statute, the FEC, the SCC, the Social Security Administration, whatever it was that was created, the IRS, Congress would say, have the authority to issue rules, and as long as they're consistent with the power we are giving you within your area, then those become regulations that are effective and become reasonable. And one of the Supreme Court cases that addressed that concept dealt with the idea of the anti-delegation doctrine. Can Congress delegate to an agency that authority? And one of the important Supreme Court cases that happened in the 1930s was a Supreme Court case that said that's okay. Agencies can make regulations. Last comment I'm going to make about this is it's an important analogy for us to remember that we've let this happen to ourselves, but it's not been all at once. It's been slow. It's been over a long time. And you'll hear courts use this analogy a lot. You know how to cook a frog?
Yep.
You don't put a frog in a pot of boiling water because the frog's going to jump right out. How do you cook a frog? You put him in a pot of cold water, let him get comfortable, start swimming around, and you slowly turn up the heat. And when the heat gets warm enough that the frog dies and then gets cooked, the frog never knew what happened to him.
Yeah, and that's where that's kind of where we're at. And I'll throw one thing in there, and then John, I'm going to just smooth as silk transition over to you. It's going to be, you people are going to be impressed with this. But I said this last week. I think one of the main problems we have is every branch now, and the world did not start 4 years ago in politics. Every branch for decades seems to get more and more upset that they don't have all the powers. So in other words, if I'm in a House of Representatives and I have limited powers, I get really upset when the president, who I may disagree with, exerts his powers, or if the Supreme Court goes against something I think, instead of being able to just say, I'm going to do what it seems like everybody's trying to circumnavigate the powers and find a loophole so everybody will agree with their party. And it's that battle of the separation of powers, I think, that we don't hold our own party in check with. And so with that being said, John, the association side of this and the lobbying, I think we'll probably dive back in and out of the Constitution conversation, because I think a lot of this has to do with how far we've come from what we were intended. Is that not correct? And I'm going to say it. I pinned the AARP and the AAA, so you can jump in there or slowly work your way back in.
Well, I said those names because they're household names. I mean, we say those letters and we know what that means. If you're 50 and over, you joke about AARP. Well, I got my card. It came in the mail.
Yep.
And we know if we say AAA in general, our generation knows what AAA is. I broke down. I locked myself out of my car. And their penetration rate to the industry that they work in is 33 million people that are giving them money to belong to something that's going to take their car and tow it, remove it, unlock it, and the way that they continuously, 88% of the people renew their memberships is at some time they've used it. Husband's been out of town, car's broke down, wife calls AAA. I'll never not have a AAA membership. Now, here's the statistic. 83% of the people that have a AAA policy have the same exact coverage on their auto insurance.
Oh, wow.
And the insurance industry knows it, and AAA knows it. But when you think auto insurance, you don't think a breakdown tire, but all these policies have roadside assistance built into it, and the insurance industry is making money hand over fist by taking that money from people and people not knowing it and still paying AAA to have their service for them. So the point being is that people belong to something because they feel like what they're belonging to is going to benefit them through, most of the time, fear or ignorance of understanding what they need to know, and they think the association is going to represent them.
Is there, real quick, is a union, is that an association, or are we talking, are there two separate things?
Two separate things.
Okay.
Two separate things. The largest professional associations in America are the Realtors Association and the Bar Association. The Realtors Association is 720,000 members strong. The Bar Association right now sits at 380,000. And Eric will tell you that that's not the majority of attorneys that are members of their association. But because I think the Bar attorneys right now, last time I looked at the website, was 900 something thousand. So, but when I ask people, so why do you belong to an association? Well, it's to provide me benefit for something. So I wanted to read Webster's definition of an association. It's the act of associating or being connected with. And one of the most common associations that's been created, which right now, if I said associations, those are normally 501c something. But there are 29 501cs. Most people, when you say 501c, they think 3.
Mm-hmm.
But there are actually 29 different 501cs that these associations build themselves inside of. And the most recent association that was built from a nonprofit standpoint was when Jamie Dimon, Warren Buffett, and Jamie Dimon, Warren Buffett, and Jeff Bezos built a medical association, nonprofit, because they wanted to control their health insurance cost. And it was a big deal. The three of them coming together and creating a nonprofit health insurance association to provide membership benefits to their 1.2 million employees.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
where do we get? I know you're walking us down the path, though. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So years and years ago, Automobile Manufacturers Association, there became all these associations that were created going back, like Eric said, even to the 1800s with these associations, because they knew that for us to get what we want, we need to assemble in numbers and then to have someone that's a representative of all of our association members going to the federal government and moving them in the direction we want them to move in. And that was years ago. So it was started to be just influence and education, because the country was growing. And when you went to the Senate or Congress, there was no way that you could understand everything that you needed to understand about a bill that you were voting on. And so they had people go up there and have speeches and legislate and talk to your staffers. What's happened, and it really happened if you look statistically in the 1980s, is when lobbying really took over. The lobbying budget right now in Washington is 3.5 times the 3 branches of government's budget. Now, if you look, and that's published numbers, so you can go look it up. It's 3.5 times the executive, the legislative, and judicial branch budgets, the lobbying budget is. And you got to ask yourself, why in the world would the lobbying budget be 3.5 times what the 3 branches get? Well, it's because they want to influence those 3 branches to vote the way their associations or organizations want them to vote.
But isn't this in this kind of like all the movies we see, if you watch the West Wing TV series, but isn't this kind of how politics works? I mean, the associations go represent Clint Powell, that's part of the association. John Ballinger, who's the red team member, Eric's the blue team member. I didn't mean to insult either one of you, but you both are garnering my association support, because then I'm going to turn around to my associate members and go, hey, we're all going to try to support John Ballinger because he's going to help our association out the most. Isn't that where we're heading with this? Isn't that how it kind of got derailed?
That is, and if you look at where the power of the money for associations lobbyists for, and it's not just a nonprofit association that creates power. It's for-profit corporations that have lobbyists on their payroll
Yeah.
influence change. But the majority of the companies that can afford that are Fortune 500 companies. There's someone that they know, hey, we've got to invest in lobbying dollars in order to move the direction we want to go in, whether it's heating and air, whether it's the Bakers Association, whatever it is, we've got to have someone up on E Street working on our behalf because we can't do that without them.
Eric, do you see this as an issue like John? And then John, I want to come back to you after he's done, and you give me a reason why it's bad.
Okay.
So, yes, it's a problem. It's a big problem, but it's been a big problem for a long time. Let me take you back. Do you guys remember Little House on the Prairie?
I'm really young. Yes, I remember it. Damn it.
Do you remember why Michael Landon went to Chicago in one episode? Do you guys remember that episode?
I remember that. Absolutely.
He went there for a meeting of the Grange. The Grange was the patrons of husbandry. It was the Farmers Association from 1867. This stuff has been going on forever. So the farmers got together and said, we need somebody to speak for us in Washington to make sure that farmers' interests are protected. That's been going on since around the time of right after the Civil War. And it was it's a normal thing. People are going to want to have their interests protected. The problem that we've had that's developed over time is not necessarily that groups have come together and wanted their interests to be protected. It's that the result of that has been an influence on the government that's out of proportion to the people represented by those associations in some ways. But it's also a worse effect in the United States because the government has become so big, so powerful, so broad that it's become, people rely on the government too much to be the answer to all the problems. And so if your business has a problem, instead of figuring out the best way to deal with the problem through good old fashioned hard work, determination, fair dealing, capitalism, create a bigger, better product, market it better, do all those good old fashioned things that make your company better, there's too much of a temptation to go to Congress and say, the Undertakers Association lobbies for a bill that says in order to become a registered undertaker, you have to pass this 2-year-long apprenticeship and a impossible to pass test, but grandfather in all the people who already are undertakers. So it provides this level of protection. So what you end up with the size of the government, and the government no longer just being an umpire calling balls and strikes, instead making rules, picking winners and losers, is you have crony capitalism. You don't have a fair society. You have big companies, banks that are too big to fail, insurance companies that have laws that protect them in ways that the ordinary person is not protected. You have all kinds of special rules and loopholes. And the bigger government is, the more the individual companies are going to go in there, or the associations, and try to get special exemptions or rules for them. And so we have this multi-layered problem. One, government is too big, and two, associations and big corporations have too much power. And then one of the issues that we can discuss is we have free speech in the United States. We have the First Amendment. Well, the U.S. Supreme Court said in the Citizens United case that spending money to lobby, to give donations to legislatures is protected free speech, which sort of opened up the floodgates in terms of companies and associations having the ability to influence legislators by making big donations to either them or their political action committees and other funds, so that the people with money and the associations especially and the big companies maybe have more of a voice in Washington, D.C. than anybody ever intended. And there's just so many layers to these issues that John's spot on, that these are all issues. The worst part is that the attitude of the legislatures is no longer to do what is the best for the whole country, to do what is the best for business generally or for the citizens generally, but what am I going to do to make sure that my party and the lobbyists supporting me continue to like me and continue to support me?
Well, because they need the money, right, John? I mean, a politician, as soon as they get elected, they need to start, raising money for the next reelection.
This was actually told to me by a U.S. congressman. And I was in Washington, D.C. dealing with the health care debate at the time. And he said, as soon as we get elected, we start running for office again, reelection. And we can only do that with money. because this every 2 years, I mean, we get elected. Now we got to start filling our coffers up again. And so the system, the people that give that money know exactly what I'm talking about. They're like, you know what? He needs money, and we need him to influence the bill that we've got before the House floor. So let's slide $50,000 over for his election, or to the PAC of his choice, or whatever. And Eric's right. I mean, it just gave money started just flying around Washington D.C.
Well, you said something though earlier about it's run by administrations now, by administration, basically by, and I think you and Eric both have alluded to it. That I don't, I'm in charge of an association, or I'm in charge of a committee, or the SEC or whatever. I don't have the ability to make laws, but by the way we've set this up, I can put in regulations that can be enforced by the government, which we all know if it can be enforced by the government, it can be enforced at the point of a gun, or, incarceration or fines, right?
Well, I think we're so big and it's so inflated now that I don't even think the federal government knows what is and isn't correct by the law. I think there's so much legal fiction that comes out of the administrations now that they really don't know what is and isn't. And because we don't know what is and isn't, then when it comes out, we just take it for what it is. And if you don't find somebody like Eric or find somebody like me that calls, like, nah, that's not quite right. And I have done that before with insurance companies and lawsuits and things. Like, there's no basis for this under U.S. code. You just pontificated a bunch of legal fiction on a piece of paper, and you think, oh, okay, well, I guess that's what it is, and it's not.
But how does this, when we try to, because I want to bring it back to the mission of the series and the video, the disconnect between the common person and the government that we have put in place. We've talked about associations. We've talked a little bit about lobbying, and I'm sure we're not done with that conversation. But how does this create distance between Clint Powell and my government? And why does this create such animosity towards me? Is it because I see I'm in plain view now, the special favors being done, and I'm left out?
Well, let me answer that, Eric. If you don't, as a citizenry, we elect or appoint 546 people to run this country between the three branches. They're either elected or appointed. And there's 330 million Americans. And so there's an expectation that that's our association. Those are the people supposed to be lobbying on our behalf. They should be the gatekeepers to make sure that we're not taken advantage of and that we, for and by the people, are protected. But what happens is they've sold out, and Eric and I both agree on this, the administrative branch, which we call the fourth branch of government, which is the lobbyist, the administration side of the government, and what I'd call power and influence, has literally overtaken the three branches of government. And when you become elected as a congressman or senate, there might be some altruistic values that, this is what I'm going to go do this in Washington. And when you get up there, you get sit down and say, all right, here's how this game works. And you either play this game with us, or we're going to figure out how you're not going to come back to Washington and play this game anymore.
But you said that real quick, and then y'all can take it. A little light bulb went on for me. This is how slow I am compared to these two guys. My light bulbs are like 3 weeks late. So the light bulb that went off for me, though, is when we don't feel represented, things like the Tea Party pop up. When we don't feel represented, things like the BLM movement pops up. When we don't feel represented, you see, or if you don't feel that you're getting what you want, that goes back to my comment. I think there's just a part of a government. They don't get all the powers, so they get a little whiny, and they're going to take their ball and go home, and they're going to make it like they want it. So I think they cause the chaos, but I also think we miss out if we actually don't admit that there are people that don't feel heard. And that's why you have things like the Tea Party or movements. They set up to get influence, right? That's right. What they want.
Here's the thing, Clint. So you're telling me I belong to AARP to make sure I get a discount at a hotel or my medical supplement that I need at a cheaper discount through a healthcare company. So there'll be 33 million of us that will do that, but there's not going to be 33 million Americans that say, you know what? I need to join this so I can have power and influence in Washington.
Oh, I agree. Eric, do you see this the same way? Do you think that that's why you see things pop up?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a little bit more ambivalent on the idea of whether it's a horribly bad thing, it's a good thing, or it's just the reality of the world. AARP is generally more liberal in the policies that they support, and I disagree with some of their policies. And they have a really large voice. And when they walk into some congressman's office, when a representative from AARP says, well, AARP thinks we ought to do this, that congressman pays attention because AARP is given a whole lot of money. And that's really what we're talking about here with the influence of these different whatever the associations are.
Well, the NRA is the same way.
The NRA is a big one, and
Yeah.
the NRA swings around Washington D.C. a whole lot of money, and if you don't vote against anything coming close to gun control, if you're not on the side of the Second Amendment, the NRA is going to make your life very difficult in Washington D.C. And unless you are a politician from a very, very blue location, the NRA can be pretty scary. I happen to be a pretty strong supporter of the Second Amendment. That doesn't bother me so much. I think we need something like the NRA to stop the gun control lobby, the people who want to stop Americans for the free exercise of our guaranteed constitutional rights. But that's my personal belief. I think that we need an NRA or something like the NRA to support Second Amendment rights, and that's the problem. The problem is that there are lots of different associations, and they do have a lot of power, but there's nothing stopping most people from joining one association or another. It's not a high membership fee to join the NRA or AARP or AAA. And there's other, and like what you talked about, Black Lives Matter, that organization now popping up. It's gonna be interesting to see what they do going forward, because they've raised a whole lot of money from big corporations, and to see what they're going to use that money for in influence. We'll see how that works going forward. And then a whole sidebar on that is there's stories that money actually goes to Blue Wave and Blue Stream and some of the other Democratic fundraisers. But the point that you made earlier is crucial. That if people feel left out, one of the things that they can do is find an association that'll represent them. If the small business people are nervous about excess regulations, the Small Business Association is out there to fight to stop the excess regulation. If you were a farmer in Minnesota in 1878 and you didn't feel like you were being represented in terms of the protections you need to make sure that you had a free access to markets for your corn, you joined the Grange, which is why Michael Landon got to go to Chicago in that episode of Little House on the Prairie.
Okay, hold on real quick. If you're playing the Eric Buchanan, John Ballinger drinking game, it was the 21-minute, 35-second mark that we had our first Little House on the Prairie reference. Moving forward, just drink when you hear that. So I guess my question to you, though, is when we act like, and I'm trying to put this in a way articulated, if it's NRA and I'm a member of it, then that's fine. Right? Because I agree with what they're saying. But when it's someone else's association I disagree with, all of a sudden, personally, I think we go back to, John, what you said, we're complicit. All of a sudden, that power is bad. Either associations have too much power, or they're not vetted to make sure that their motives are pure, or they don't have too much power.
Well, there's 92,000 associations in America right now. And who do you think?
How many?
92,000.
Wow.
Okay. That's a big number.
Who do you think is the oversight of those 92,000 associations?
Eric Buchanan and John Ballinger.
The IRS. That's where you get your association letter stamped and approved from, is the IRS. And so they're supposed to be the purveyor of all things associations. Now, if you know anything about that 3-letter alphabet word of the federal government, they're not the best stewards of making sure things get done and the money gets spent the way it needs to get spent, collected. But they are the oversight to associations.
Well, and we've also seen other administrations in the past use the IRS to target certain groups that they didn't really like at the same time. Yeah,
we've seen that locally happen. So I would submit that associations are needed. I absolutely believe. But I believe that once given that power without oversight, and they get so large that they wield the power to usurp authority on the 3 branches of government, someone needs to step in.
And I want to just confirm, because whenever we have people start commenting, I like to, validate and thank them for jumping in. Money to Black Lives Matters goes to Act Blue and then funneled to the Democratic Party. It's easily able to verify and verified by going to the BLM website. That's true. Where you'll also find out that they have a lot of agendas that I'm not really sure a lot of people know of. And if they knew of, probably would think twice. I will say this, though. I don't get frustrated, but I do a little bit because I'm, again, not as smart as you two. When you say there's 92,000 associations and we need somebody to an oversight, it seems to me that we need to add more bureaucracy into a system that oversees these associations, which could be corrupted too, right? I mean, would it be another layer of bureaucracy on there?
I just think it needs to be audited. If this is what you say you're going to do on your application, you're going to be audited to ensure you're doing exactly what you said you were going to do. And I look at it no different than, any other organization. Small business owners they're famous for this. They go into business to do X, and they tell their insurance broker, "I'm going to do X." 5 years into it, they're doing 15 other things besides X because all they're trying to do is keep the doors open.
That's right.
And I think that there is, and so when they have something happen in year 5, and they started out with an insurance policy, said, "Oh, well, you're just a painting contractor." But what happened is a guy fell off roofing a house. Well, hold on a second. When'd you start roofing houses?
I was painting the house roof. I was painting it. Leave me alone. Give me my money.
We'll also add on to our houses. We'll upgrade our houses. And so we used to have a basic kitchen, and now we've got granite countertops and high-end cabinets. So we don't have oversight, or people aren't giving information to the appropriate parties to make sure that. And to me, here's the rub of it: the branches of government, with the Senate, the Congress, the judicial side, and the executive branch, they are the gatekeepers to make sure that this gets done. And we've gotten so large that how we're getting things done is who gives us the most money. It's not what's right. It's who we think's right by the money that we're given.
Because we have to get reelected.
That's right.
Yeah. And technically speaking, if I'm not mistaken, Eric, because I've read some documents, we the people are really the biggest association.
We are the biggest association. And at the other end of the spectrum, each one of us is the smallest minority. An individual is the smallest minority. Mm-hmm. And the whole point of a constitutional republic is that you don't have the will of the people trample the rights of the individuals. So you have to have, we're not a democracy, for example, because we have constitutional rights that limit how much they can do to individuals. One of the problems with associations and the amount of money involved is we end up more and more with a system that doesn't protect individual rights, that doesn't protect the individual people, but instead favors certain people over others because they have more influence in Washington, D.C. They have more influence on the laws. The laws are no longer fair laws used to be used by umpires, but are more picking winners and losers. And one of the problems that John alluded to is, well, all these associations, who's really making sure that they're behaving properly? And there's really two ways. There's number one is the IRS looking to make sure that they're not doing something against their charter, spending money on something they shouldn't be spending on. And the other thing that can happen is they can be sued if they're not following their charter, if they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. The problem is who's going to sue them and for what? So one of the things that's going on right now is Washington, D.C. and the state of New York are suing the National Rifle Association, claiming they've been wasting funds. And a big question is, those are two very blue prosecutors. Are they doing that because of legitimate concern that the NRA was not spending the money properly? Are they doing that to hassle the NRA during the time of an election when there's?
I think we know the answer to that. I think perception is perception is reality on this stuff, right?
So, right. So we have those rules. So let me just take a step back. When you have the problem of government has become so big that you need people to oversee all these different associations, and you have these giant agencies that are actually part of the federal government that have all these rules. At some point, who's providing the oversight to make sure they're doing their job? And this goes back to Roman times, and I love the quis custodiet ipsos custodes. Any idea, Clint?
Well, I was going to bring that up, but you stole it. I have it written down to bring that up. Way to go.
Who watches the watchmen? Who's going to watch the IRS to make sure the IRS actually does fair audits of these associations? If we have a blue president, the IRS might go in and over audit red lobbying organizations and not give them their tax exempt status or not give them the appropriate treatment under the statute. If we have a red president, he might send the IRS after blue organizations to do the same thing. And to be fair, I think we need to. There were allegations that that's what happened under Obama against the Tea Party and some of those organizations, that the IRS was unfair. But we also had the equal situation probably under Nixon, where he sent the IRS after some of his political enemies. The problem is that the IRS has a whole lot of power, and who's going to make sure that they do it fairly? And it all goes back to, ultimately, there is too much power in the hands of the federal government, that it's exercising too much jurisdiction over too much stuff. It's gotten too big, and you can't watch over it. There aren't enough watchmen to watch the watchmen.
And John, don't you think this goes back to us holding the foam finger for our teams like we're football fans? I mean, when we buy into, I'm a Republican and I'm going to defend Republican values, air quote values, I'm going to defend the leaders no matter what. I don't care if they've done it wrong, if they've done it right. I am not going to hold my party accountable, because why? I'm afraid to lose. And if we lose, I don't have that power and influence, and I'm not represented. And it's this big cycle of, I mean, literally, I almost wonder if we're in a bizarro world, because I watch Democrats actually support people that they are crucifying things for the Republicans. They crucify Republicans for. And then I watch Republicans support people that they crucify the Democrats for doing. There are things they crucify the Democrats for doing. And meanwhile, we are so supportive of our team, irregardless. I think this all works together. I'll tell you who should watch the IRS and who should watch the politicians. We should.
That's right.
It's our job.
But here's if you ask the general public what political affiliation, and they say Democrat or Republican, and you say, okay, so what's their platform? What is it you believe in? They can't tell you what the actual platform. And the reality is, I don't know that a Republican senator or congressman could tell you what the platform is for the Republican Party, nor could the Democrats for the Democratic Party.
I think they could tell you their talking points. I think
absolutely.
They can throw up to you the headlines.
They get fed that when they go up there. But the reality is, what is the foundation platform for your party, and why do you believe what you believe? And why are you representing?
And the thing is, when Eric Buchanan does something wrong, if I'm voting for Eric and Eric does something that's so egregious that he's out, then that's fine. That's part of consequences. But most of the time, if I can say, Eric, I don't like what you did, we need to fix this. You need to apologize or explain yourself because I voted for you. We now have a zero tolerance policy. Eric can't explain it or ask forgiveness. Eric is either all good or he is all bad because of the color of the Republican or the Democratic Party logo.
Listen, you can't take anyone serious that's been in D.C. in a congressman or senator's position for 40 years that then wants to run for another part of an office. How do you take them seriously when they say, but now I'm going to fix the government? Now's the time. After 40 years.
So what do we do? How do we, we've mentioned the problems, but when you go back to this conversation about associations, John, and I want to make sure you squeeze all the juice out of this lemon, because I know this is a big deal. You live in this world, and I know you do too, Eric, but you live in this associations world, the lobbying world all the time. What should we be looking for as we the people? What can be done for associations? Or is it just too big now? It's got to get too big and break itself.
Absolutely not. I'm kind of in the peripheral of what I would reference as a policyholders association. This is in an infinite stage, but people that buy insurance policies have no concept of what they're buying. And so they need representation between themselves and the various states that they're buying it from and the various insurance companies. What am I buying? And so one of the things that I feel like needs to happen is all the exclusions for an insurance policy need to be on the front pages. This is what you're not covered for. And in the world of insurance, if it's not specifically excluded, it's included somewhere in those 156 pages. But
Eric, as an attorney, do you like that idea?
Absolutely. And by the way, John, there's a group called United Policyholders out of San Francisco that has
very well. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I'm friends with those people. I agree with a lot of their issues, although they're awfully blue politically,
Yes.
and they are anti-insurance, I think, a little bit too much. And I think the reason I say that is I think having the right kind of insurance is crucial for businesses and crucial for individuals to protect, say, their future income, or life insurance if they pass away, so that their spouse and their kids can still have a life. I'm a big fan of the concept of insurance, but it needs to be done fairly and properly. And all the stuff you're talking about, there needs to be more organizations, and it's like that. Let me say this, Clint. Instead of saying that associations are the problem, I think we could also say associations are the solution. If people understand how the system works more, I think you can get an organization like the Tea Party to be more active in politics. They could raise more money. They can go lobby, and they can actually be an organization that would take on the mission of watching the watchmen, going up to DC and saying to the congressman, you cannot pass this law that says that a bank that was founded before 1999 gets to have X, Y, or Z, but a new bank doesn't get to have X, Y, and Z, or whatever it is. That if you don't already have an undertaker's license, you're not allowed to get one unless you go apprentice to an existing undertaker, and they get to approve whether you get to have a license or not. That's exclusionary. There's all kinds of rules like that. And organizations like the Tea Party, another one I like is the Institute for Justice. Um, they are a pro-capitalism, pro-freedom organization that fights any rules that limit the access to the ability to earn a living. So, for example, they've taken on in lawsuits states that have had excess licensing laws. For example, African American women who like to braid hair can do that for a living. Some states have said you have to have a full-on 2-year cosmetology license, which requires you to be able to do all kinds of haircuts and everything else, not just braiding hair. They've taken on that issue and successfully gotten courts to say, no, that's an unfair licensing issue. But it takes more organizations like that. The Institute for Justice is one of my favorites, but there's other organizations like that. And what it takes is more people understanding that those opportunities are out there, that the right associations, the right organizations can make a change for the good. We need to take the time and effort to go out and support them.
And John, I hijacked that from you. I'm sorry. I was asking you if it's too big, too broke to fix it, and you were saying no. So please continue.
It's not. There can be, out of those 29 different associations, those 501(c)s, there is the ability to create associations where people join for $1, and that association has a mission of protecting the various interests of America that are the most complex. And there are really three complex organizations that really affect everyday citizenry, and that's the insurance industry, the banking industry affects them every day, and the legal and what I would call political industry, lobbying, all that. Those every day they impact Americans' lives, and when those industries have oversight, looking at how things are administratively completed, it can change the landscape, because now you've got this many people that belong to this association. They are represented by people that understand what I call the chess game, because we play checkers out here in American public while chess is being played in Washington.
Yeah.
And we never catch up with the chess match that they're playing. And so I tell people all the time, we're playing checkers, they're playing chess.
But this is why elections matter. I mean, I know we kind of minimize it sometimes. My vote doesn't count, and again, I say I think elections matter. I just don't know if you put a good person inside a system that's this big and this massive, if they just don't get chewed up, So I don't know.
Well, they do normally get chewed up, and I've been working for over a decade trying to find the true number of a large healthcare association that we're all familiar with, and how that association is a not-for-profit, but actually has some money on the for-profit side, and then has for-profit entities. And if you start just doing your own investigation, trying to go down the rabbit holes of all the not-for-profits, all 30 plus of them in all the different states that roll up to this for-profits publicly traded, it is a maze and web like you have never seen in your life.
Really?
And we, the people, are funding that maze. continuously funding that maze without any knowledge or understanding. And I'm talking about political people when I say, can you tell me about the health insurance industry, which is different with health insurance and health care are two totally different topics. And most people try to combine those into one. No, it's two different things.
Yeah, they conflate them.
It's health insurance industry creates care and the healthcare pays for health care. Two different things. And talk to them about it and have them understand it. They get lost. They don't know how to talk about it.
Well, you know why, don't you, John? Because all those policies have been written by, don't say anything, attorneys. Shh.
Well, no, but I was
look at Eric's face. Eric hates me right now.
No, it's attorneys.
Not all attorneys are the same.
No, that's true.
And Eric's right. But attorneys write the policies, they defend the policies, and they prosecute the policies, and the consumer pays for that coverage, that defense cost inside the policies. So we're paying as citizenry the debacle of they write the policies, they defend the policies, and they prosecute the policies.
Well, and I'll be honest with you, I've gotten letters. The reason I said I've used Eric in the past for his ability to write stern letters and other professionals is because policies are written by attorneys that are on somebody else's payroll that have, and I'm not holding it against them, they get paid to do a job. So they write these policies with insurance professionals in size 2 font on the back of a paper with hidden deadlines and therefore the outs and tooths. And I can't read it. So I have to take it to somebody like Eric that smiles at me and goes, have you replied to this? And I go, yes. He goes, you're an idiot. And I'll write you a letter. And so I got to have somebody that's smart like Eric because he knows the why and the how of how it's supposed to work. Eric, there's your plug.
Yeah. So part of the problem is that there are just too many rules. And actually, let's read this quote out loud. There is no way to rule innocent men. The only power any government has is the power to crack down on criminals. Well, there aren't enough criminals. When there are not enough criminals, one makes them. One declares so many things to be a crime that it becomes impossible for men to live without breaking the law. And that's where we have become as a society. I'm a lawyer that's been practicing for almost 25 years in the same practice area, and I still learn new stuff every day about insurance and ERISA law, and I'm constantly having to learn. If you ask me to go deal with First Amendment issues or free speech or gun rights or pick another practice area, I'd have to start from scratch. And there's just so much to learn, in part because there's just too many laws already under the U.S. Code. And then there's probably 9 or 10 times as many laws under the various agencies' regulations that they've issued. Nobody can keep up with all of them. Nobody can keep up with most of them. What we can do is find professionals like me and John who learn our little part of it and could advise businesses and individuals on their rights under our little part of it. But if I have an issue outside of my expertise, I'll go find another lawyer who does that kind of work or another expert who does that kind of work. And I think John understands, he does the same thing. There's the stuff he's learned a whole lot about, and then he finds this new area. He's got to go find who's the man or woman who's studied up on that new area that he can go ask advice from. I do that all the time as a lawyer. The system has just become way too big. What are some of the things we can do about that? Well, one, I think enough lobbying and interest from people. It's time to push back against the non-delegation doctrine. The fact that agencies have so much authority to issue regulations with no political limits on that, because congressmen can just simply say, I didn't pass that law. That was that stupid agency over there. Well, except the congressman did give the agency the authority to issue that law. So that pushback. Another way that we can push back in just simple stuff that we should be arguing for is the single caption bill. And what do I mean by that? In many states, the rule is that when you pass a law, that law has to have the subject of the law in the title, and everything related to that law has to be related to that subject. So if we, for example, are going to pass a law that says if you're live on a Zoom meeting, you can't walk around with your camera and make everybody get dizzy, I cannot slide into that bill the rule that Clint has to brush his teeth before he can go on the air, because that's not related to the topic that I wrote the bill about. That if I write a bill about insurance rules, I can't also slide into that bill rules about how many kids can be on a school bus or whatever, totally
Well,
unrelated.
real quick, we've seen that recently.
Well, so here's the problem. The United States does not have that rule. Tennessee has that rule where the three of us are. Tennessee says you can only have a single caption. The law, if it's a law about undertakers, it has to be related to undertakers. If it's a law about insurance, it has to be related to that type of insurance. But in the federal government level, you can have the Consolidated Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act of 1996, and it can be all about healthcare and not the budget. Or it can have healthcare, and it can have taxes, and it can have budget, it can have military spending, it can have what color shirt you have to wear if you go to whatever. They throw it all in there, and it's a 4,000-page bill that we have to pass to find out what's in it.
Well, and to say this, if you're wanting to, and I don't say it's a law, but if you want to see something that frustrates me, is recently when we get the fight over, are they going to send another payroll protection or another stimulus check? Well, then you have all the unions and you have all the other side jumping in going, we'll pass this if you include these 9 things that have nothing to do with what we're trying to get pushed through. Then they get to stand up on TV and go, well, they're blocking it. Well, the reason people are blocking it is because you're adding things that have nothing to do with the goal of what you said we were trying to get accomplished. And then we wonder why we're crazy.
And it's been going on so long, Clint, that there's an expression from the 1800s that they're filling the barrel full of pork.
Can I get, pork belly. Hey,
these are not new things, Clint. It's just they've gotten bigger and worse.
Oh, okay, but
year.
They're not new things. But I think, and John, I understand you had to charge your phone up. It's okay.
I
get it. Yeah, I know. I've done about.
All I know is I need some Dramamine after watching
200. I've done about 300 of these, so I know when somebody's phone's going dead. But I will say this: I think the media, and people hate when I say it. I will get people message me that I'm being a crybaby, but the media, and I think our system that we have actually built is being weaponized against us now, because now we're scared to have honest conversations because we're going to get called something. We're scared to stand up and say, why is my representation, not the Democrats, why are the Republicans saying this and doing this, and the Democrats are the same? They're afraid that if they actually say stuff, they're not going to get kicked off the team.
Well, there's 2 reasons. One, it is so large and complex, we don't even know where to start at as far as the conversation. And 2, we bring too much of our feelings into these conversations. And the reality is you need to keep the emotion and feeling out of the room and have just honest conversation about here's what the intent was, here's what's happened that's eroded that intent, in order to bring it back to a balanced scale. And that's why I love the law. I do. I love the rule of law. I love insurance. I think it absolutely is needed, but it's been hijacked by corporate greed and corruption. And there needs to be the brakes put on it and say, all right, stop. Here's the line. We're not going to do this. Here's how we're going to bring some balance back to our society. Because if we don't, we can look at 20 years from now, and this thing doesn't look good in 20 years.
I don't think it's going to look good in 5 years if we don't. I've said this to you guys, but I feel terrible for my kids. I mean, if there's not these little pockets of conversations like we're trying to have, if they're not springing up all around the country over coffee, not just videos, but coffee tables, and if they're not popping up, then I think we are going to let the fringes of both parties take over the conversation. And then everybody in the middle is going to get silenced and we're going to get minimized. And then I think common sense becomes the minority voice. That's what I think happens. Hey, listen, I know we got to wrap this up here in just a minute because we're going to keep them to an hour or less. We're right at an hour. Is there anything, though, that John, on the association side of it, we can always have this conversation and revisit it, but is there anything today that you didn't say or you want to say?
I want people to know that there are associations out there that can represent them well for the interests that they feel like as a consumer. There's 92,000 of them out there, and belonging to one that's actually fulfilling its mission statement for its members can be a great thing. And so if go out there and research, what can I do to get involved in an organization, association, a nonprofit that I feel like represents my interest, because we're all wired differently. We all have different things that interest us. Go out and find your one, attach yourselves to it, and go to meetings and go to their website and look at the discussions that are being had. That's how you start getting educated and be part of influencing change.
Eric, anything to add to that, sir?
Yeah, the last thing I'm going to add is we talked earlier about who will watch the Watchmen. Who's supposed to be looking over all this? And it's we, the people. We should be doing it through associations, through our civic involvement, having conversations like this. But we also have one other institution. The First Amendment provides for the freedom of press in the United States. And that was our founding fathers recognized from the very beginning that one of the things that will ensure freedom in a free republic is the press calling out mismanagement, totalitarianism, abuse by the government. The job of a free press is to watch over all of this and report it so we know when the abuse is happening. And I submit that the amount of free press left in the United States is getting smaller as a percentage. There's a whole lot of resources out there, places you can go, but it's not necessarily the mainstream media anymore. And unfortunately, I'm afraid that too much of what we traditionally see as our media, as the newspapers and the TV stations and the networks, are no longer free and objective, but they picked a side. And I don't like that. I don't think that's good for America. So you have to look hard to find those organizations that will report the news objectively, or at least have not totally thrown in with one side or the other.
Good stuff, guys. I'll look forward to next week. Now, next week, I'm confirming this, saying out loud now, Monday. I am right this time, John. It is this Monday at 10 o'clock. I've already double checked it. We're going to do it again. And I'll send you guys some ideas unless you have them. But I think after next week, we might want to start talking to bring our first guest or two on. And I've got some ideas, but maybe next week we go down that road a little bit of maybe how we should talk to each other and, like civil discourse and the media a little bit. Would that be something you two would be willing to talk about, or?
Sure.
Dangerous.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Can I give a quick plug there, Clint?
No.
For anybody who's, thank you. Thanks for interrupting.
It's y'all show. Oh, Eric left. Look at that. He hit the wrong button. Yes. I've never felt more vindicated. Hold on a second, John. He's going to click back in. I did not click him out. My hands are right here. That makes me so happy that he messed up. If you're watching Eric, click back in. If not, then I'll come back on with him. But I am going to ask you this question, John. Can you hear me still?
I can.
Here's the last question I'll ask. And let me text Eric to click back in. He is so frustrated right now. I bet he's just talking away. He's just talking away. You've heard my hey, click in. You've heard me and Monica Perez, right? That I do from the Propaganda Report. And I love her. I love her, and I love the Propaganda Report podcast, and that she's a hardcore libertarian. But I've said this with her now several times. And I'm going to ask you, do you believe that government is inevitable? Because I get stuck sometimes on these conversations offline with people when they go, a perfect world would be, and they go back to a time and place that I don't think we can ever get back to because we had 10 million people, 5 million people. And they also want to become so separate that I think we forget that when you get a group of people together, government is inevitable. Do you agree with that? I think government's going to happen.
It's going to happen. And so my question is, I agree government's going to happen. But the question is, are there good and bad people? And as long as there's good and bad people, if there's not some kind of oversight to make sure that bad people are held accountable for their actions and good people are protected, and you can't, to me, anarchy and I'm going to go get my M16, and if you come on my side, pass this sign, I'm going to shoot you.
You got to, if it gets to that point, you want to protect yourself, but I say this all the time. There are bad monsters out there. I want to have good monsters too.
I agree with that, but good monsters are educated people that understand the system and can navigate it and protect the citizenry against those bad monsters.
Okay, Eric, you're back on screen. I did not click you off.
Baloney. You had to have, because I didn't touch anything.
And now you
had
sound
to have
weird.
Something. I could still hear you guys and see you guys, and I was gone, and I didn't touch anything.
All right, give your shout out.
Totally log out, go back to the Facebook page, to the Instant Messenger, and re-click on the link to find my way back.
All right, give your plug in, sir. I did not touch anything. Look at this. My hands are here.
The plug I was going to give very quickly is we're talking about in the next couple episodes, talking about civil discourse and having conversations, maybe talking about depolarization a little bit. And I have joined an organization called Braver Angels. It's a national organization. They have a blue person and a red person for every leadership position. and I am one of the co-chairs for the state of Tennessee now, and we hold workshops, lessons, skills workshops, and sometimes topic driven issues. The idea is not to change people's minds so much as it is to provide an opportunity to discuss with the other side politically what your disagreements are, and to find some way as Americans to have empathy for the other side and understanding for the other side. So they work on the theme of empathetic patriotism. We can disagree politically and still be Americans. We can disagree politically and still respect each other's opinions. But we're starting to lose that ability to have those conversations and those skills. So the organization, if anybody's interested to go look at it online, is Braver Angels. And if you want to instant message me or private message me through Facebook or email me, you can talk to me and I'll tell you more about it. But go to the Braver Angels website if you have any questions, and we'll be doing a lot on that more and more going forward.
All right. Thank you guys very much. Again, if you're playing the drinking game, I think we mentioned Little House on the Prairie 5 times. Next week, we'll see if we can up that a little bit in midday drinking at 10 o'clock.
There's going to be, Andy Griffith will get mentioned next week.
I'm going to bring up Bonanza. I'm bringing up the Cartwright. Y'all can just hate it if you want to. All right. Thank you both. I appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Good talking to you.
Thank y'all for watching. Talk to you next week, Monday at 10.